Hello and welcome to this episode of Security Scan. I'm Vishal Dahiya, and this week we're going to talk about disruptive technologies to be used by armed forces. Some which are already in use, and some obviously the future technologies which have been talked about for quite some time now. And the focus is seemingly slowly but steadily shifting to these technologies. For more on this, we are joined by a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Retired Group Captain Ajay Lele. He is a senior fellow with the IDSA. We're also joined by Retired Lieutenant General VK Saxena, distinguished fellow at VIF, and the defense correspondent of the Tribune, Mr. Ajay Banerjee. Welcome, all of you gentlemen. Sabha TV. Let me begin with you, Ajay, and let's start by putting things in perspective here. Recently, there has been a seminar conducted by the Indian Armed Forces, wherein the Indian Army Chief was present, and there was a lot of talk about these disruptive technologies. So what's happening on the ground there as far as Indian Armed Forces are concerned, and what's the viewpoint in the forces there?
See, first of all, what the Chief has said is a manner of saying that now it is time to change. The change has to come now or never. It is like now or never at the moment. Because the way the technology is progressing, the way things are changing, it is better we change. And I'll read out one little thing which the Chief has made it clear. Just to explain to your listeners and viewers, that the Chief has spoken about the need for drone swarms, robotics, lasers, loiter ammunition, to artificial intelligence, cloud computing, big data analysis, and logarithmic warfare. Now, to explain, loiter ammunitions are a thing which is some of the countries possess, including us, but we need more. Drone swarms needed more because we will have a kind of a airspace, contested airspace on both our fronts, the west and the northern front. We will need robotics because each where you cannot have a man posted out there. Artificial intelligence will be needed because how to read the enemy's mind. It is no more boots on the ground. Boots on the ground are very important. That's not taking away from them. But keep in mind, the robotics and the artificial intelligence will bring into a new dynamic to it. Artificial intelligence will mean you know what is happening. You know what is the next step. You know what is the next step of the enemy. And it will also include a lot of stuff which will include mind space reading also and what the enemy is thinking. So these things will happen because it's no more a kind of a bayonet to bayonet battle or a gun to gun battle, because things have changed rapidly as we are seeing now on the front in Ladakh also. A lot of drones and new technologies are being used by both sides, not just us, not by China. Both sides are using new technologies, new things which are happening, and this is a constant process which I believe the Chief has made the right step, and the time for the three forces now is to change. The Air Force has taken some kind of a lead, but I think the Army is probably needing to change much more now, and the Chief has made the right step. That's what I believe, Vishal.
Okay. So there is the context out there, but disruptive technology is a term which we have heard and being talked about in various aspects of daily life as well. I'd like to bring in General Saxena here. General Saxena, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, all these are aspects which are already in use. And during these pandemic times, we've seen how digital technology is further, is changing the way we live as well. But when we talk about defense forces, what's the context here for disruptive technologies vis-a-vis defense forces?
See, the basic point in defense disruptive technology has to be differentiated between civil and armed forces. In the civilian circle, when you say disruptive technology, it is a technology whose application, as we all know, changes the way a particular pattern of operation was being done. It may change a pattern of operation, it may change the competitors, it may drive out the incumbents, it may produce a low cost and good item to the new target audience, etc., etc. But in the armed forces, disruptive technology is something which can bring a change which is akin to the change brought about by revolution in military affairs. What is revolution in military affairs is said to have happened when the military tactics, doctrines, and strategies change so profoundly that it changes the very nature the warfare is conducted. Now, the glaring example of this in the army was the advent of the unmanned systems. As and when the unmanned systems have entered the space, the battlefield has never been the same. They initially came in as a look-see weapons, looking beyond the hill. Then they came as intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance vehicles. Then they became a combatized vehicles carrying munitions which can give a run for their money to combat platform. Then they fought shoulder to shoulder with combat platforms. And now they are coming, as Ajay was just bringing out, in swarm drones, in which they have a mind of their own, they have intelligence of their own, and they can continue to operate a mission from beginning to end. This is the type of technology. So he is talking about other technologies like artificial intelligence, like augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, like robotics, cloud computing, and so on, big data analytics and compute and quantum computing and so on. These are the technologies which will bring a sort of change, which will change significantly the way the warfare was conducted. That is the connotation of disruptive technologies in armed forces.
Okay, let me bring in Group Captain Ajay Lele here. Group Captain Lele, we've spoken about several of these technologies on our show here, be it drones or loitering ammunition as well. But one very important aspect here, I believe, is further to understand is that it has to be looked from a different viewpoint for all three forces. As Ajay was pointing out, Indian Air Force seems to have taken few steps, but Indian Army right now seemingly is planning to move ahead in various aspects. So how would you look at the force-wise requirements and needs as well, per se, for all these disruptive technologies and their specific use there?
I think if you permit me, let me first start putting disruption in context. What is actually a disruption means? Good old days, we used to click photographs by using Kodak films. Suddenly you had mobile telephones which are coming up, and that entire concept of a film's negatives, development of the films, one roll having 36 snapshots and all that has suddenly changed. So this is what we call a disruption. So in military context, how a disruption should be viewed. In good old days, say in the era of a First World War, we had observational balloons which were being used for gathering of intelligence. Now, what sort of a disruption which has happened over the years? The same type of intelligence now is being picked up by satellites. That means your balloons have been disrupted by a technology which is a satellite technology. Similarly, if we follow the entire debate of the technology during the First World War era, we used to fight battles by using horses. All of a sudden, the tank came in and the horses got disrupted. So I think this is the context in which we need to look at a disruption, because you were using a horse, now a tank has come. That means the existing military technology has got disrupted. So to put forward your question now, in all the three services, what sort of a technologies which we are using and what sort of a disruption which is expected or which is already happening? You see, in modern day world, you can't say that a disruption, that means old technology has been replaced only by a new technology. Here, a new technology itself could be a disruption, because all the technologies which we are talking today, artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing, Internet of Things, blockchain and all that, these are all not technologies per se on their own domain. These are some sort of application technologies. That means you have a armor, you have a ship, you have a battle tank. Can you use artificial intelligence on the operations of these battle tanks or any other units differently? Can your 3D printing help you to do certain amount of differences into military industrial complex? Like what was been explained, that it all started with revolution in military affairs. Now we need to look at it, say from an Air Force point of view, can a fighter aircraft which is being used and flown by a pilot replaced by a drone aircraft in coming future? I think that's sort of a disruption which we are talking. And since drone technology has become a very successful technology, hence definitely not only Indian Air Force, any sort of Air Force all over the world will always have some sort of an advantage as far as induction of disruptive technologies are concerned. Rest of the services will have to look at where they can juxtapose the technologies like artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing, Internet of Things, etc.
Okay. Ajay, one very interesting aspect here is also that as Group Captain Ajay Lele is pointing out, that this is about change, and this is not that it is not that this change is happening right now only. We have to look it into a context as well. But any change, adaptation to any change has its own process, and there are obviously obstacles as well. How are we moving ahead if we talk about Indian Armed Forces vis-a-vis adapting to these new technologies or disruptive technologies as we're talking about now?
See, Vishal, we have to, first of all, in my humble belief, I believe that the forces have to change, especially the land forces have to change their mindset of increasing the numbers. See, by increasing the numbers does not help in today's world because China has actually reduced the numbers in the past 10 years. The US has right-sized themselves. The Japanese are actually increasing a bit, but the Japanese are quite behind actually. But the Japanese are also inducting the latest of technologies. They are now saying that we are making all the stuff that they're making is like what they were doing earlier also, but new technologies are coming in the Japanese forces. Now, talk in context of China. Please understand, China reduced resources and put a lot of money into technology. And that includes research and development, including of new equipment, drones. They are trying to match the US. Are we trying to match the US? Probably no. We are trying to match the Chinese. Yes, we have to match them. We have to tackle them. Why do we need this change? We need a first, as I was saying, a change in the mindset. Now then comes in the technology part. How to use the technology. Because everybody in the force may not be equipped to use that technology. You need specialists to run that technology. This is the change we need to bring in. We need boots on the ground. That goes without saying. But the technology part has to be like woven into the boots on the ground part now. It cannot be segregated. It has to be woven. And the better we do it, quicker we do it, the better. Because we are, I believe, behind by at least a decade to China. Because China started this process in 2011. And then she came to power in 2013 and their restructuring was done and they right-sized their forces and they reduced the numbers by around 200,000 if I'm not wrong. Vishal, that's what I believe time has come now.
Okay. Quite an interesting way of looking at things. Let's hear the gentleman as well. Let's start with John Saxena. John Saxena, your views on that. Obviously, the need is there, but how do we go about fulfilling that need and adapting to the change as well? Because bringing in more disruptive technology would also mean adaptation in terms of training, in terms of perhaps a different kind of manpower, which will be required to go ahead and tackle or handle those disruptive technologies.
I will pick up the thread where Lele left, and he made a very pertinent point that it is not the technology per se which is disruptive, it is the use and application of the technology which makes all the difference. And I will say very humbly that even the army, there is a lot of induction of new technology. What is required to change is an attitudinal mindset to accept the change. Now, let me give an example of artificial reality and virtual reality. Now, there are Indian companies. For example, there is a company which is right in front of the simulation business, Zen Technologies Limited. In every defense expo, they put up their systems which explain how, by using augmented reality and virtual reality, they can create a reality where none exists. They can create a terrain which can be desert, mountainous, forested, and whatever, glaciated. They can create environment which may be sunny, sandstorm, and with any time of the day or night. They can create weapon systems which fire virtually and can create the difference between a skilled operator and an unskilled operator. I am trying to say that this technology needs to be adapted more and more by the decision makers who bring in this change. They accept the change. For example, take the case of artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence can manifest in many fashions. I will just take the case of manned and unmanned teaming in the Air Force. Now we got the attack helicopters. We also got aircraft which are capable of integrating with those unmanned platforms. Now it's a time for a change to adapt this manned and unmanned teaming as a way of life in conducting aerial warfare. Take the case of robotics. In the case of robotics, the more and more it is not only just changing or loading of ammunition or unloading of ammunition or using them in workshop or using them in field diagnostic. I am saying adapt the change in using them freely on the battlefield as unmanned ground sensors, as unmanned and unattended ground combat vehicles, as vehicles which can do contamination check at various things in contaminated areas, carry out reconnaissance, carry out your operations. Now everybody is talking about cloud computing. There is a big risk and danger in which our own data, mission critical data, can be lost, and it is on a cloud which is a remote server. Now, there are many things where the cloud computing can help which are non-mission critical. For example, training. I'm just taking the case of air defense control and reporting system, all real time. Even if my computing is exposed in real time, it is fine. It is real time. It is happening then and there. Talk about a large amount of military training can be taken on by different parts of the country. Training in different aspects can be brought together. Live force on force scenarios can be built using this particular technology. So it is not that the technology is not there. My point is that there is a need for an attitudinal change to accept new technology, bring in as a mainstream, and change the old ways of things, which should open from the decision makers onward. That is what is
Okay. Okay. So there needs to be an attitudinal change, something which Ajay is also pointing out. Group Captain Lele, your views on that before we move on to identify the new emerging techs which need to be focused upon. Your views on this aspect as to how do we move ahead? How do we adapt?
I think attitudinal change are the need of the hour. What one must understand that we are in the era of what is being commonly known as a Industry 4.0. So what is this era? This is linking of your physical world to digital world to a biological world now. So under these circumstances, armed forces need to understand and appreciate that the technologies are not going to come only into the realm of a warfighting zones. Military infrastructure is a huge, gigantic infrastructure where logistical requirements are there are medical requirements which are there, so on and so forth. So the disruption is going to come in every aspect of where the technology is being used in the armed forces. So under these circumstances, a time will come where you will have to change your military or warfighting doctrines too. So one has to be akin to the fact that a stage will come where you will have, because you see the type of a technology which you are going to induct today, hypothetically speaking, suppose somebody starts inducting hypersonic weapons. So under these circumstances, what is your entire debate and discourse on missile defense systems? Because the present generation missile defense systems become totally redundant as far as one can say about hypersonic weapons, because these are the weapons which are going to beat the present generation missile defense systems. So if your war doctrines are based on present generation architecture of a nuclear warfare and a conventional warfare, then you need to make those changes. I think those changes have already started happening also, but let's give some due to the armed forces too in their thinking. Network-centric warfare has been a reality for now for almost last 2 decades, and armed forces are ensuring that their doctrines get tuned to what sort of a network centricity is appearing. I think as and when more type of technology, because you see disruption is very difficult to forecast. So if a disruption comes all of a sudden, like I was giving an example of a Kodak camera, nobody realized that within no time that entire infrastructure will go waste. So similarly, if tomorrow a technology comes into being which will disrupt the existing entire your military thinking, military warfare techniques and tactics, then you will have to bring in doctrinal changes over there. And I think that's where the military forces need to adopt themselves very quickly, because they will have a very less amount of a time, because the technology will otherwise take over them.
Okay, definitely doctrinal changes, attitudinal changes are required. And as Group Captain Lele pointed out, it is not easy or rather almost impossible to go ahead and predict kind of disruptive technologies which we might see in the future. But coming to the last round, and let me start with you only, Group Captain Lele. In terms of emerging technologies, where should be the focus area, or where exactly is the focus area right now? If you look at other defense forces as well, and where we need to focus starting from here onwards.
I think one has to be slightly careful when one is discussing a technology. Technology is not an answer on every individual issue or every individual challenge. Technology is just a force multiplier. So under those circumstances, one should avoid getting into the zone of a technology replacing a human being totally, because there are a lot amount of issues which are associated with it. I'm not getting into the details of lethal autonomous weapons and other areas. I think we all have discussed those issues. But the issue over here is that the technology itself has got a lot of what I can say disadvantages too. So one has to really look at it. Are you in a position to give the operating system totally into the hands of a machine, where a machine will take a decision to kill a human being? I think all those challenges will come up. So even though the disruption will come up, one has to be ready to accept the facts that there will be issues at a level of a United Nations. Somebody will raise the issues of arms control. As you know, that blinding lasers were banned. There is a discussion happening on banning of hypersonic technologies and various other technologies also. So even though the technologies will come up, it's not necessarily that it will come up into the hands of our armed forces immediately, because the politics of technology will definitely take over. And what one has to see to it, that beyond politics of this technology, what good technologies could be used by armed forces to enhance their capability. So technology should not emerge as a force, but it should emerge as a force multiplier.
Okay, that's a valid point. It should emerge as a force multiplier, and perhaps there will be some ethical questions, associated with certain technologies as well. But that's a discussion apart. Ajay, I'd like to bring you in here on the emerging technologies part and the key focus areas for us, for our defense forces, and the kind of situation we are in right now, strategically and geopolitically as well.
See, Vishal, first of all, I think what we need is greater artificial intelligence used in surveillance. On our western front and on a northern front, we are committed lakhs of troops, and the recent standoff with China has increased our duties along the line of action control on the Himalayas. Now, this costs a lot of money. Let me tell you, viewers, a hell lot of money is used in just posting these troops out there, feeding them their habitat. We would need some kind of artificial intelligence gathering along the Himalayas and also on the western front, which can then be married to a kind of a combat area, which is specified, a combat unit, which can use this technology to hold back the intruder along the LOC in facing Pakistan and also the LAC facing China. We have to have some kind of technology infusion in keeping an eye on the borders. That is the most important thing, I believe. The next part, the robotics, the swarm drones, the artificial intelligence can come in later. But the first thing we need is a kind of a system which watches these borders, and we have a reaction time married to the reaction teams which are on ground behind. We cannot have thousands of or lakhs of troops manning the entire Himalayas. It's a huge, humongous task and a lot of money, Vishal.
Okay. Let's have quick concluding comments from General Saxena on this viewpoint. General Saxena, the emerging tech, the focus areas, key focus areas.
2 points which Ajay brought out. The biggest debate or the ethical debate which is emerging will be, are we allowing machine over man, or is it man over machine? This is one of the biggest debate which is going on, and as he rightly brought out, that technology should not overtake the human intent, human intellect, man in the loop. They say that if you allow machine over man, then you lose some sort of an autonomous, some sort of a human control over the battle, because ultimately the boots on ground will matter. That is the first thing. The second thing which I am talking about, that if that be so, how are we going to allow the disruptive technology? We are going to allow them in the area where it makes a tremendous amount of difference. Now imagine in the case of a missile. Now today the case of the cost of ammunition is skyrocketing. Training scales of ammunition have come down to 0.25 missiles per man per year. Therefore, in 4 years, a man fires 1 missile. Now, how do you better train him? An ammunition which is a gun which is firing 2,000 rounds per minute, how do you make the operators fire that day in and day out? They're not possible. How do you fire them? How do you make them fire not in the air, against the enemy targets, against the enemy aircraft, their cruise missiles, their other weapon systems, attack helicopters? How? We can create. Disruptive technologies can create a realistic air threat. Disruptive technologies can create simulated weapon systems which give you the same effect as firing actual weapon in terms of recoil, shock, jerk, vibration, smoke, flash, everything. So why don't that is the area we have to grab. We don't become the machine over man, but we have to grab. Ajay was talking about surveillance. Now, taking a case of a gridded surveillance vehicle which have a mind of their own. Even if you destroy one vehicle, the other vehicle knows that the place is to be taken. These gridded vehicles are fed with a default environment. This is the environment. They know this is the environment. Moment there is a change in the environment, moment there is something which changes, they immediately report. Now, this is the type of technology which we are heading towards in terms of artificial intelligence. 6 drones attacked an Arab facility in UAE and disrupted the oil production for half the country's oil production gone for that day. Imagine the Russian could not, even with their buck system, could not defeat those 16 drones which came and attacked them in the month of January. Imagine the power of disruptive technologies. Okay. While we do not become the machine over man, but we must take into account the areas where we stand to gain immensely. In training, we stand to gain immensely. In new technologies, surveillance, target acquisition, intelligence fusing, we aim to gain fantastic. We need to adopt that.
Okay. Thank you so much there. So perhaps, as Group Captain Lele pointed out, it can be summed up in one sentence there. The technology or disruptive technologies rather should not be seen as a force, but as a force multiplier in terms of helping us understand the situation, train us perhaps much in a much better way, and augment the capabilities further for that soldier on the ground. Thank you so much, General Saxena, Group Captain Ajay Lele, and Ajay Banerjee there as well for sharing your views and time with us and our viewers. That is all about disruptive technologies. This is a topic which has a vast, aspect, and it further will be discussed on this particular show. We'll bring you more aspects as well. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television. Thank you.